Hi there, welcome to another Commodore 64 compilation review, and this time around I'm going to be looking at a budget compilation. It's the confusingly named Zeppelin 4x4 Combat Pack 3. I don't know. So this was released by Zeppelin Games in 1992 at a cost of £3.99, so it's 4 games for £4. I guess to compete with the likes of the Quattro packs from Codemasters and also the 4 game packs that were coming from alternative software at that point in time. So let's take a look at it and see how it compares to those and all the other compilations I've been looking at. Let's begin then by taking a close look at the packaging. As I said, this has got a very strange name. So it's the Zeppelin 4x4 pack, and it also says 4 games in 1 pack, just in case it wasn't clear already. And it's combat themed, but it's also called Pack 3. So Pack 1 and 2 aren't combat packs, they're other kinds of games. But for some reason, yeah, they call it the Combat Pack 3. So I guess you'd really say it was a Zeppelin 4x4 Pack 3-Combat, if you're going to be smarter about it. So you could say this is a direct competitor for the Quattro Combat Pack that was released by Codemasters, I guess, although the games are very different to that in general. So anyway, yeah, Commodore 64, obviously, it says in the top right-hand corner there. It's got the covers of the original games that they were released. They were all released individually, I think. So we've got Spaghetti Western, Kickbox Vigilante, Ninja Commando, and Bionic Ninja. Take the Ninja out of those 2 games, you get Bionic Commando. Probably not a coincidence that. So we've got not great artwork on the front. I mean, it's the artwork from the original packaging, but they've kind of padded it out. For example, Bionic Ninja's got this red box around it. Ninja Commando's got a blue one. Kickbox Vigilante also has Kickbox written down the side of it like it was the spine of the original cover, so it doesn't look great, to be honest. And on the spine it just says Zeppelin 4x4 Combat Pack 3 again. And on the back we've got the descriptions for the 4 games, which I won't go into now. I'll describe them when I'm looking at them later on. But again, not really that impressed with the layout. You've got a screenshot of each one, but then you've just got like a box in a different colour with the description of the game on it. Pretty plain font as well. So yeah, I'm not really impressed with the outside of the packaging. Let's have a look inside and see if it gets any better. So here's a look at the cassette, and as you can see, very plain, just printed onto the tape directly. There's no label. It says Combat Pack 3. It's a bit rubbed off. It says Side A's Ninja Commando and Bionic Ninja. And on the other side, which is a lot cleaner looking, it says Kickbox Vigilante and Spaghetti Western. So they're in a completely different order to what they are on the cover for some reason. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to have a look inside, and we've got the instructions for each game, a bit varied it has to be said. So Kickbox Vigilante's got a bit of a blurb and how to control it, and tells you about the challenges and things like that. And then it's got the maneuvers as well, which is fair enough, all the joystick controls with and without the fire button pressed. Fair enough, so you get 1 page or 1 side of the inlay for that game, and then the other 3 are crammed onto 2 pages. So Ninja Commando, you get lots of information about the game, and then you get the controls. Well, these controls are weird because look at the diagonals there. It's suggesting that you've got an extra level of diagonals, so you'd expect to be having like left and right, up, and then up left and up right, but you also seem to have like up right right or up right up down right. I don't know what it is. Anyway, there can't be those controls in the game. Basically, it's impossible to have another direction on the joystick. So weird. And then so that's another page, and then the last 2 games are on 1 page, and you've got Bionic Ninja again. Just got the joystick directions and tells you how to jump between levels and gives you a list of the levels in the game. And Spaghetti Western Simulator doesn't really give you a lot of information about the controls, but tells you lots of things about items you can collect. So it's a bit varied, as I said. And then the final page is the Air Crew, which I mentioned on one of my Gaming Vault videos recently. It was a club that you could join to get your information on the Zeppelin games and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, overall, not particularly impressed with the packaging on this one. It certainly doesn't compare that well with the Codemasters equivalent 4 packs. So let's see if the games are any better, and the only way to do that is to, of course, have a look at all 4 of them. Couldn't find any adverts for this one, so let's dive straight in and take a look at the first game, which will be Spaghetti Western, of course.
The full title for this game is Spaghetti Western Simulator, obviously cashing in on the simulator craze created by Codemasters, but it's got to be one of the weirdest simulators out there, and it was originally released in 1990. You take on the role of the bounty hunter Clint Westband, and you're out to fill your saddlebags with reward money by eliminating some of the fastest gunmen in the West. But beware, shooting innocent bystanders will cost you some of your bounty and relatives' compensation. You must make your way through 5 townships, clearing them of a specified number of outlaws and avoiding or destroying the many dangerous objects that are thrown at you. To assist you, items can be collected that can be used to counteract the hazards. Up to 4 objects can be held at once and used by pressing the function keys. Your cowboy has a health bar that will run down when hit by projectiles or if you shoot an innocent person. Once your health runs out, it's game over. If you manage to clear a town, you'll move on to another settlement with more hazards and a higher number of bad guys to eliminate. Graphically, I thought this game was quite impressive. The main character sprite's pretty heavy on the yellow, but he's huge and well animated. Whether it be walking, drawing his gun and shooting, or even when he dies, the way he collapses to the ground is really well done. The background graphics look the part, but the enemies and innocent characters are just simple grey single-coloured Spectrum style affairs. The sounds are pretty basic, just being gunshots and explosions, and there's no music in-game or on the title screen, so that's pretty disappointing. The game's got a simple enough concept as you just wander around the town and shoot the bad guys, and you must avoid shooting the innocents or you'll lose both money and health. There's loads of different pickups with varied uses, and I'm not clear on what all of them do, but there are health and ammo top-ups, dynamite smart bombs, crosses that kill the ghosts, honeypots that kill the insects, a pink jacket that gives temporary invincibility, and a charm which makes you invincible for a long period of time. There's also cash bags which will make a huge difference to your score if you manage to get them. The power-ups are random, so sometimes you'll get loads of useful ones and other times you'll get nothing of value and end up dying quickly or running out of ammo. Shooting enemies can be hard as they'll only appear intermittently and sometimes you're not at the right angle to shoot them. I found it easiest to walk along near the entrance to doors to get most of them. They tend to only pop out for a couple of seconds, so it's easy to make mistakes and shoot innocents. You also get constantly bombarded with different projectiles which are hard to avoid or shoot and soon wear down your health. Your character's movement is quite slow and it's hard to change direction in time to react to all the hazards. Drawing the gun and having a split second before you fire is a clever way of giving you a chance to avoid hitting innocents, but can also result in you losing health as enemies fire almost immediately. The concept for the game is not actually that bad, but the execution's flawed. In some games you can last quite a while, and others you'll die almost immediately. It's too reliant on random good power-ups to make any progress. From the second stage on it gets pretty hard and there's not much variety, so the game has limited longevity and it can be frustrating to try and make headway. Next up on this compilation is Kickbox Vigilante, a one-on-one fighting game originally released in 1990. The old masters of Jintian-do have requested your presence in their martial arts temples. They're eager to prove that no Westerner could have acquired the centuries of detailed knowledge necessary to be a supreme kickbox master. As the Kickbox Vigilante, you've accepted their challenge and are prepared to fight to the death to prove your kickboxing skill. I'm not sure the creators of this game really knew what a vigilante was, but let's move on. To ensure that you're defeated, the 4 top kickbox masters have been specially selected to test every angle of your combat skills. They appear in the order of their fighting rank and won't engage in combat until their immediate junior has been defeated. The serpents holding the yin and yang symbols at either side of the combat arena show how much damage you and your opponent's hits have caused. You must face each opponent twice before you're allowed to build up reserves for the following day's battle. First impressions of this game are great, with an excellent title screen and music. There's in-game music too, with nice Eastern style SID tunes for each level that fit the game well. The graphics are also pretty decent. The smooth movement and animation of the sprites, which are small and quite comical looking. The backgrounds are varied though. The first stage is nicely drawn, but the second stage looks messy, and I've not seen anything beyond that. You've got a reasonably varied set of moves at your disposal, though they don't correspond exactly with what the instructions say. It's very hard to make contact with your opponent with most moves, but they manage to hit you easily. It's hard to block anything, and I'm not even sure if you actually can. The only moves that consistently make contact against the first opponent are the headbutt and sometimes the flying kick if you time it right. The strategy is therefore to try a flying kick, go past your opponent, then move backwards, then headbutt them on the way back. It's amusing and a little bit cheap that the characters don't change positions to face each other when they pass. After a few plays I could get to the second round against the first guy pretty consistently, but your health doesn't restore between stages, so it makes it really hard on the second attempt as they'll usually get several hits on you in each bout. I did eventually make it to the second enemy, which is a ninja, and was decimated quickly. The strategy I used for the first guy doesn't seem to work, but I didn't want to keep trying to find out what does. The game's clearly influenced by other more accomplished fighting games, with the IK Plus inspired background of Stage 1 and the Yin Yang health bar of Way of the Exploding Fist. Having different enemies and backgrounds also gives it a Street Fighter or Yeon Kung Fu vibe that you'll probably never see past the second one based on how hard it is. Unfortunately, the game's very much a case of style over substance. It looks and sounds good, but it's pretty unfair to play and gets boring quickly due to the limited number of effective moves. It's also missing a 2-player versus mode, which could have made it a much better proposition at budget price. Moving on from one martial art to another, and the first of two ninja games, this is Ninja Commando, originally released in 1989. The player takes control of a ninja and must guide him through various side-scrolling levels, defeating an army of enemy ninjas and dodging obstacles. In each stage there are doors that constantly spawn new attackers, and initially the player can only defeat enemies by jumping on them. However, defeating 3 enemies in a row will result in a new weapons power-up, each more effective than the last, starting with a shuriken and progressing to bombs, a flamethrower and a rifle. The game consists of 8 extensive levels with a variety of environmental hazards and enemies. Much like Kickbox Vigilante, the initial signs for this one are good. It's got a nice title screen with a decent SID tune and the obligatory scrolling message that was on a lot of title screens at this point in time, and the in-game graphics are really nice, with small but well animated sprites and detailed backgrounds. The sound in-game's not so good though, it's sound effects only and they're pretty unimaginative. Gameplay is a mixture of run and gun and platforming, and it reminds me a lot of Ghosts and Goblins, not only visually because of the small sprites and the backgrounds, but also because it's rock hard. One hit from any enemy kills you and they don't even need to be that close. Quite often you'll die by just happening to land next to one as it walks into your vicinity. There's also some tricky pixel perfect jumping sections that'll see you falling to your death if mistimed, and some random moving obstacles, some of which can't be destroyed so need timing to get past them. Progress is not helped by having to jump on enemies to kill them until you get the power up, so when you do get weapons I think some of them are quite odd for a ninja. Throwing stars make sense but they're low powered. The bombs are very much like Ghosts and Goblins' torch, moving in an arc and quite hard to get on target. The fire breathing is neat and kinda ninja like, and the gun is just weird for a ninja but obviously the best weapon. I found it strange that you don't have a sword as the base weapon instead of having to jump on enemies, and the game does give me the vibe that it may have started off as a military run and gun that had the character sprites changed at the last minute to cash in on the ninja craze. The enemies are very samey to begin with, all being palette swaps with the player's ninja sprite, but they do have different characteristics, such as blue ninjas jumping and brown ones firing at you. Due to the one-hit kills and tricky platforming, I found the game hugely frustrating to begin with, but eventually worked out a strategy to get powered up early on. After that I did make some progress, though you can still get caught out by randomly jumping or spawning enemies, so you need to be careful, and in some places it's better just to power through quickly to get to the end of the stage rather than trying to earn points from the constantly respawning enemies. When you do reach the end of the stage, there's no boss, you just finish the level and move on to the next, earning a bonus for remaining time, which I didn't realise was even a thing during the level. Later levels add different enemies such as space ninjas and golems and new hazards to go with them, and are even more difficult. The backgrounds are just recycled from the first 2 stages but with different colours. There's a couple of aspects that really let this game down. There's very iffy collision detection on the edges of some platforms. You can seemingly get stuck in mid-air on the very edge of a platform and then drop off when you try and walk back onto them. Also, diagonal jumps don't work consistently, and you can also find yourself double jumping sometimes, leading to mistimed jumps or deaths. Due to these frustrations I only got to level 2 a couple of times and couldn't get anywhere, as there are jumps that are really hard to make, and when you die you can respawn in places where you fall and die as soon as you move. I gave the game numerous chances with the standard number of lives, but just found it too frustrating due to how easy it is to die unfairly, so I reloaded the game with an infinite lives cheat to make a bit more progress, but didn't really see anything more appealing in the later stages. I feel that one simple change to this game would have made it more accessible, which is to lose your weapons when you hit if you have them, rather than an instant death. That, along with some better attention to the collision detection, would have made for a far more playable game, but as it is, it's just too frustrating to persevere with for long. Rounding off this compilation is the second Ninja game, Bionic Ninja, originally released in 1988, and in this one aliens are attacking Icarus Earth Defense Base and within 90 minutes will overrun it. The solution is to send an android installed with the Oriental disciplines of the East to defeat the aliens over 5 levels. I'd have thought an army would have been better really. You play the role of the Bionic Ninja and you must use martial arts as well as shurikens and a sword to eliminate the various occupants of the base. You're able to switch between the 3 attacking options by pressing the spacebar at any time. If you're hit or shot by an enemy, then your energy bar is depleted, and when it's empty you'll lose one of 5 lives. Extra power can be collected by picking up cases when they appear. Each level is split into 2 sections and they must be completed within a time limit or the game will end. This is a horizontally scrolling beat 'em up / run and gun featuring an upper and lower level of the screen to walk on, similar to games like Shinobi and Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja. The scrolling is very smooth, but it's almost too fast as you seem to race through the levels and can often run into enemies before you've got a chance to react. I'd say the graphics are just okay. The player sprite looks the part and is animated well but lacks colour, and there's lots of different enemies, but the scenery is very samey, at least from what I saw of the game. The big problem is there's no sound at all in game, which makes it really dull to play through. It really highlights how important sound is in a game. As I mentioned, you can switch between weapons with the spacebar. This, however, was not mentioned in the instructions of the compilation at all. There's really no point using your fists or the sword for the most part though, when the throwing stars will allow you to kill most enemies from distance. It should really have had the stars and sword as power-ups or have a limited quantity, as having them permanently makes the less powerful combat options redundant. The controls work fine, with pressing fire and pushing up or down to move between the two levels making sense, but there's no ability to jump to avoid projectiles unless you move between floors. This could easily have been implemented by pushing up on the joystick. Your player loses health really quickly when enemies run into you or you into them, which as I mentioned can happen easily with how fast it scrolls. There's also some grey droids that don't seem to die so have to be ducked, and if they run into you, you can lose all your health and lives in a matter of seconds. I had a few attempts at this one, but always ran out of lives midway through the second stage due to a flurry of those grey droids. I think this had the makings of a reasonable budget game and could finally have given us a decent budget scrolling beat 'em up, but it seems like it was unfinished with the lack of sound and some glitchy enemies, and that ultimately makes it rather boring to play. That does it for a detailed look at the 4 games then, so let's now give them and the compilation as a whole some ratings. So I'll start with the individual game ratings, and firstly Spaghetti Western. I thought this was a decent concept with some nice enough graphics, but it's let down by over-reliance on random power-ups and awkward controls, so I'm going to give it a score of 5 out of 10. Kickbox Vigilante looks and sounds great and could have been well worth the budget price if it had a 2-player mode, but the high difficulty level and lack of effective moves makes it a chore to play, so for that reason I can only give it a score of 4. Ninja Commando is the best game on the compilation, but ironically also the biggest disappointment. Great graphics and huge levels are plus points, but the ropey collision detection and occasionally glitchy controls make for a frustrating experience overall. I'd heard good things about this one and wanted to like it, but I can't in good conscience score it any higher than 6 out of 10. And finally, Bionic Ninja has the framework of a fairly decent beat 'em up, but the lack of sound and dull landscapes make it boring to play, and it's too easy to lose health and lives without having a chance to defend yourself. It's another one that's ultimately disappointing, and I'm going to score it 5 out of 10. I'll move on now to the overall compilation rating, and firstly the packaging. I found this very average. The cover looks like it was hastily thrown together with inconsistency in the list of games between the front and the back, and the instructions are very hit and miss, with some of the information missing or incorrect for a couple of the games, so I'm going to give it a score of 5 out of 10 for packaging. The score for the 4 games averages out at 5 out of 10, and in terms of value for money, well, it was £4 for 4 games and you could get a bit of play out of all of them, but I wouldn't say any are worth buying the compilation for individually, and you probably wouldn't load anything but Ninja Commando more than once. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give it a value for money score of 6 out of 10. That means that the overall compilation rating for the Zeppelin 4x4 combat pack is 52%, and I have to say I'm quite disappointed by this one. I've always considered Zeppelin to be one of the better budget publishers thanks to the likes of Zybex, Draconis and the Blinky games, but these 4 are not amongst their finest offerings. The whole compilation seems a bit bodged together with the awkward name and average packaging, and it's strange that it has 3 martial arts games and 1 odd Wild West one, making it a bit incohesive. I was definitely expecting better, with Ninja Commando being a particular letdown, but I suppose for the price you could still get some value out of it. That was my view on this compilation, but let's now take a look at what the Gaming Press thought back in 1992. I found 2 very different reviews of this compilation, so let's first take a look at what Zap thought of it. This is from issue 88 from September of 92, and as you can see, Combat Pack 3 spans the top half of a 2-page spread. What's interesting about this one is that each game gets its own rating along with an overall compilation rating, so it's not too different from my own rating system. What is different though is the scores that all these games got. The majority of the review is just an overview of each game along with a screenshot. There's not actually a lot of criticism here until the last paragraph, but for Ninja Commando it does say the sprites are small but they certainly pack a punch, and this is a compulsive vigilante style beat 'em up, and they gave it a rating of 85%. Well, I've got to say, that game's absolutely nothing like Vigilante, so I'm not sure if they even played it based on that comment. There's no critique at all for Bionic Ninja, not even mentioning the fact that it's got no sound, and they've given it another high score of 82%, which is just crazy. It continues on with a lot of explanation and very little critique of the final 2 games, giving Kickbox Vigilante 78% and Spaghetti Western 77%. The reviews rounded up by saying overall this game packs very playable. They say that some of the graphics leave a little to be desired, which I think is a bit of a strange comment actually, because the graphics in all of them are pretty decent. The reviewer then goes on to say the only thing that puzzles him slightly is the inclusion of a cowboy game. Why not keep it all in an oriental vein, which is something I mentioned myself, but they finish by saying that's a minor niggle because Combat Pack 3 is well worth the measly price tag, and give it an overall score of 81%, which makes me wonder whether the reviewer was so into martial arts that he got a hit on the head sometime. For the second review, I'm moving on to the October 1992 issue of Commodore format, and this one's part of the Roger Frames Buys Budget Games feature and covers a page and a third. This is of course littered with the inanities that come from the Roger Frames article, but at least there is actually some critique of the games. It begins by saying 4 games on one cassette. Now that's what I call 2 games on each side delicious, but as always we've got to check the quality of the 4 before hurling $3.99 at the bewildered shop assistant, and it covers the games in the same order as the Zap review did. So first up, for Ninja Commando, it says the graphics are small, the combat is rather weedy and you keep falling off. It's not that impressive, to be frank and earnest, and then goes on to say there are 8 levels of this stuff, so if you're enraptured by little running about guys, then there's a lot to get into. For Bionic Ninja, once again it doesn't mention anything about the lack of sound, but it does say it doesn't have an expensive feel, but then again it isn't expensive. It also doesn't have a particularly good feel, but then again it isn't particularly good. It's one of those games which could be called not bad for an occasional bash. For Kickbox Vigilante, it says it's a one-on-one combat affair, and even if you're good at it, you still die because your energy isn't replenished between every bout, which was the biggest problem I found with it. It goes on to say it's pretty smooth and there are a lot of different moves you can do, but on the whole it's not that special. And finally, for Spaghetti Western Simulator, Roger says he's got a depression the size of the Grand Canyon after playing this game. You walk along a street avoiding the odd barrel that bounces towards you, people pop out of windows and shoot at you, and you must turn around and shoot them. It's a load of nonsense, and when you've taken enough damage you fall over and die. Utter nonsense, so obviously not very impressed with that. The final paragraph of the main review says, so there you have it, 4 games, 4 quid, 4 minutes of your life wasted. I'd rather be tied up by Swiss renegades and forced to eat unpleasant continental food than buy this. Zeppelin have got loads of other better games than this, buy those instead. Well, I definitely agree with that assessment. And in the box art with the overall rating of 36%, he says 4 rather grim games here. Kickbox and Bionic Ninja aren't too bad, but on the whole it's worse than calling yourself Graham Gooch and pouring a ton of sand into Poole Harbour for no reason other than because it was there. As always, a bit of a random review from Roger Frames, but I do agree with his assessment of most of the games, though I think the overall rating of 36% is probably a little bit harsh, but it's definitely closer to the mark than that crazy Zap review. Funnily enough, if you take the average of those 2 scores, you get something in the mid-50s, which is what I gave it. So all that remains for this episode is to see where the Zeppelin 4x4 combat pack ended up in my compilation league table, and taking a look at it you can see it didn't even make the top 12. With 52% it fell just outside below Foremost Mega Heroes. So that seems like the perfect opportunity to do something that I've been thinking of doing for a while as I've progressed with this compilation review series, and that's to split the rankings into 2 league tables, one for budget compilations and one for full price ones. So I will still carry on doing an overall league table, but I'll also have a separate one for budget compilations. That's any compilation that retailed at £4 or less, or came from a major budget publisher such as Codemasters, Alternative or Kicks. As a counterpoint to that, I'll also have a league table dedicated to full price compilations. So having said that, let's have a look at the budget compilation rankings, and as you can see, the Zeppelin 4x4 combat pack enters the table in 7th place with 52%. The average rating for the 4 games was actually better than the 2 compilations above it, but it was knocked down due to the poor packaging. That probably shows once again that I haven't quite got the formula right for calculating these overall percentages. But never mind, for the quality level I'm talking about here, 1% is splitting hairs really. That brings this episode of the Commodore 64 Compilation Comparison to a close, and if you've got any thoughts about the compilation featured in this episode or the games contained in it, then please let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video then please give it a like. In the next episode I'm going to be moving away from budget compilations back to a full price one, but the one I'm going to be looking at is quite special because none of the games featured in it had ever been released prior to being published on the compilation. If you think you know what that compilation is, then let me know in the comments. That video will be along in about a month's time, and in the meantime there'll be plenty of other retro gaming content on my channel, so thanks very much for watching, and until the next time, see ya!